Alright everybody, welcome to another video in the page templating video tutorial track. In the last video, Yves spent a lot of time talking about the relationship between XML files and XSL, which is how OU Campus takes that raw XML data that's present in what we call our PCF files and transforms it to style into a flexible web page. So now that we kind of understand the basic relationship between XML and XSL, which is what's been covered in the last couple of videos, let's go ahead and take a look at some new features, some specific ones that are unique to OU Campus's XML. So, as we covered in the last video, we use XML files with an extension of PCF inside OU Campus. PCF stands for Publish Control File, and we call it that because it's where all the raw content on our web page exists on the staging server before we go ahead and publish it to the production server. PCF files in OU Campus are going to contain a lot of the standard XML nodes and elements that we've seen in the past couple of videos, but there are also a few inside of a PCF that are going to be unique to OU Campus. So these nodes are important because they allow us to create a couple of key features of pages that we want inside of OU Campus, those being page parameters and editable regions. So editable regions are portions of content that are on a page that can be edited kind of individually through a WYSIWYG. A WYSIWYG editor, which that stands for what you see is what you get. This is going to make it easier for users to target specific areas on the page that you want to configure without having to worry about messing up the layout or adjusting anything else on other areas of the page at the same time. So that's obviously really great because then you have the ability to edit things besides just having it in the source editor. And then the next one, page parameters, those are used to achieve other page-specific functions in OU Campus, from defining metadata to configuring page layout and a lot of things in between. So there's a lot of customization available in there, but it's essentially, page parameters are kind of the catch-all for things that you want to edit about your page, but it wouldn't necessarily be controlled inside of a particular editable region. So first, let's kind of unpack editable regions and what that looks like inside the XML. So there are two nodes, two elements inside the XML that are going to be used to create those editable regions. The first one is called OUC:div. And that's the element that we use to actually have OU Campus recognize a block of code as being an editable region and kind of separating it so it can then be treated as its own special thing when it comes to actually editing it inside OU Campus. The other element is called OUC:editor. This one is self-closing, and it exists right after the opening OUC:div tag. And essentially what it does is it just controls some additional options for our WYSIWYG editor. So, some additional configuration tools there just to make the editor function exactly the way you want it to. So we'll obviously talk about what those two look like more specifically when we get into looking at the source of our sample PDF or PCF, sorry. But let's move on also to unpack the properties. So in order to create page parameters, there are also two nodes that you're going to need. The first one is called OUC:properties, which is once again kind of like OUC:div. It's the element that OU Campus needs to see in order to recognize something as being a page property, and then we'll create everything that's inside of one of those elements as individual page parameters, which are going to be then visible inside the page property screen. So obviously extremely important. Without a page properties element, those parameters aren't going to be recognized and you won't be able to edit them. And like I kind of mentioned, each individual parameter that you're editing inside of the page property screen, those are going to be declared with another element, and this element is called a parameter element. And those are going to contain a lot of different attributes to determine how that parameter functions and how users interact with it and what kind of data you're actually going to be getting in return from that. So if you remember from the last video, Yves had built out a simple PCF file and then a correspondent XSL file to show the relationship between XML and XSL. And if you're following along with this video series, we recommend going ahead and just reviewing that previous XSL basics video and build out a little PCF and XSL file that looks like what he has at the end of that video. Essentially what I've done over here, as I have simple PCF and simple XSL, those files are essentially what Yves had at the end of his video. The only thing that I've changed is, if you look at the preview here, I've added a couple more colors and just a little bit more stuff to make the page look a little bit more like a standard web page as opposed to a really empty HTML file. But all the same content that we saw that Yves built, so the banner, navigation area, some content right here, and a footer, all of that is in the same spots that it was in Yves' video, and we won't be playing around with any of the other foofy stuff. I just wanted to have some more colors to make it a little more visually interesting. So where we're at right now is that all of this content here inside our main body area is completely static. So in order to change any of the text, styling, or layout, I would have to go into the source editor and make my changes manually, like what we've been doing for the rest of this video series. However, the entire point of this video is we want to go ahead and actually make editable regions on this page, and also some page properties, so we can begin to use features inside OU Campus, like our WYSIWYG editor, and other things along those lines. So to start off, our first step is going to be to create all of this and turn it into an editable region. So the way to do that is we're going to head into the source code editor first. We got to find where our content is, and I can see that it's all defined here with these section tags, and then the the p tags and all that stuff underneath it. What our first step is going to do is we need to make that OUC div element in order for OU Campus to recognize it as an editable region. So what we're going to go ahead and do is, immediately after this content element, I'm going to go ahead and make my OUC div element. And as soon as I do that, you'll notice that it turns this bright green. That means that OU Campus recognizes it. It's something that's special. It's not just any other XML node. So we know that we're on the right track here. However, you need more than just declaring the element. There are a couple mandatory attributes inside of the OUC div node that are going to make some important distinctions so OU Campus can fully use it. The first one of these mandatory attributes is called label, and essentially this is just a unique identifier. Each OUC div element needs to have its own unique label. Because hypothetically you can have multiple editable regions on a single page, and in those situations the XPath needs to target those individually, and so the way that the XPath inside the XSL actually targets this OUC div is by looking for the particular label of it. And so if they're all unique, that makes things easier for the XSL and for us because we're writing the XSL. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this main content. It can be anything we want, but this is pretty descriptive for what this area is. The next attribute we need is called group, and this just essentially allows OU Campus to determine which users have the ability to enter this editable region and edit it. So it just has to match a user group that's been defined inside of OU Campus. For this one, I'm just going to use everyone, which is kind of the default group that contains all OU Campus users in this account. So for this illustration, everyone can get into this region. That's totally fine. So those are the two ones that are mandatory. We have another one that we strongly recommend, and it's called button text. And essentially, when you have an OU Campus editable region, when you have an editable region on a page, what happens is that OU Campus will render a nice little green button when you're in the edit view that determines, hey, this is an editable region, and if you click that button, that's how you actually enter it. So you can adjust what that button text says. If you don't have this attribute, it's just going to say edit, but if you wanted to, you could be a little bit more specific. So something like edit main content, or something along that line. So now I'm just going to take the bottom part of my OUC div, and I'm going to cut and paste it just so it's underneath my content here. And then right after the opening tag, I'm also going to create my OUC editor tag. This one is self-closing, so I'll just make sure it self-closes here. And there's actually no mandatory attributes for this OUC editor tag. However, there are a couple that we strongly recommend. The one that I'm going to be using here is something that's called CSS menu. And essentially what CSS menu does is that it's going to allow you to define a text file that has custom classes in it, custom CSS classes, and also you can determine what those custom CSS classes are going to be kind of displayed as, or what they're going to be named. And the reason for this is that inside of our WYSIWYG editor, we have a styles drop-down menu. And this styles drop-down menu is just a drop-down where you can apply any custom CSS classes to certain parts of your text. So for example, these things like span class red, that would be a custom CSS class, I bet. And so essentially there's just this text file that declares the class and then says a name for it. And so you just have to point OU Campus to that text file, so the styles drop-down menu in the WYSIWYG editor will actually populate. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my location of that text file. For most people, it's typically at _resources/OU/editor, and then the file is usually called styles.txt. Now, obviously in this case, I am kind of making editable regions and editor tags from scratch, which is why I would need to kind of manually type this at first. But if you're working with an existing PCF or you have an implementation already and you're just kind of playing around with page templating, typically you won't need to hand type this. The styles.txt is more often than not always the same for every editable region in your site. And so you would probably just copy this OUC editor tag from an existing region in your case. But, since I'm going from scratch, that's why I had to kind of type it myself. So at this point, what we're doing is we've got our editable region, we've got our editor tag, all of our content here is inside of it. I'm going to go ahead and save to take me to the preview. And however, I get this issue. I've got this transformation error going on here, and so my page is breaking. The reason why, this is a little error message that says the prefix OUC for the element OUC div is not bound. And what that means is essentially just means that we need to declare the OUC namespace. If you remember from the last video, Yves kind of talked about namespaces and the concept of those. OUC : that is a namespace, and because we are declaring it inside of this file, but we're not telling the parser what OUC really means and how to understand it, that's why the document's breaking. So essentially what we need to do is we need to declare the OUC namespace in this PCF file. And eventually we'll actually have to do that in the XSL as well, but we'll get there in a second. So what I'm going to do is up here at the root node of my file, which is called document for this PCF, I'm going to make a new line just for kind of clarity's sake. It's a little easier for me to see it that way. You could keep it on its own line if you wanted to, but as long as you're inside the document node, then I'm just going to go ahead and put XML namespace and then OUC =, and then I just have to determine where the definition for what OUC means is located. And that's located at onupdate.com/xsl/variables. And there we go. So now we've declared that. And since we also have OUCs showing up in this page, we also want to go ahead and add OUC to the exclude result prefixes attribute. It's just another attribute that goes inside the root node. And I've got this right here. So now that is all declared nicely in my PCF file. So now what I can do is I can save, and now I'm going to get this. And the reason why all of my main content just suddenly disappeared is because as much as we've added inside the PCF, we've also changed the structure of everything that's gone on inside of this content node. And because of that, since we have XSL that's specifically designed to target stuff inside this content node, that's why things are breaking, because the XSL is now no longer up to date to recognize how the PCF looks currently. So what our next step is to go into the XSL file and then revise our XSL to make sure that it's targeting the OUC div and applying that accordingly. So let's hop into our XSL here. And what I'm first going to do is I'm going to scroll down here. And if you remember from the previous video, essentially what we did is that there's a template match that matches the content node inside of OU Campus. And then it's also doing this thing where it's applying a template called section. And if we go down here, this is what the section does. It applies the template that takes the attribute of the heading and also puts the content inside of it. But then there's also another template match in here that says heading that just essentially takes whatever the attribute of the heading is and puts it inside of an H2. However, because we want those headings to be adjusted inside of the WYSIWYG editor, and the section attribute is not actually considered a valid HTML tag. What we actually need to do is we need to delete all of the template matches for heading and section. And we're also going to delete the apply templates that looks for section, because obviously now we don't have a template that's called section, so we can't do an apply templates for it. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to, first of all, go ahead and do, instead of an apply templates, I'm going to do an XSL copy of. And then I'm just going to do this little node symbol, which is going to say everything that's inside of the content node in my PCF file. I'm just going to take a copy of that and display it inside of a div of content. So that's going to take everything that's in my PCF and essentially reapply it onto the page so it shows up now. But additionally, it's also important for us to make sure that we're declaring the OUC namespace inside the XSL as well, because since there is an OUC div node and an OUC editor node inside my PCF, when I do a copy of, that's going to essentially copy it through, and the parser, if it doesn't have the namespace declared, it's not going to understand what those things mean, and it's still going to break. So we just need to go up here into our root node for XSL. It's an XSL style sheet element right here. And essentially, we see that we've already got a couple namespaces declared here. I'm just going to declare one more. And it's the same one that we did inside the PDF or PCF, which is OUC. And I'm going to put its location again. And I'm also going to include OUC inside exclude result prefixes. So now at this point, OU Campus will understand, or the XSL will understand what OUC is in addition to the XML understanding it already. And we're going to apply it there. So let's go ahead and save. And if we go back to previewing our simple PCF, now we can see that my content is back. But if we go into the source, I still have these sections right here. And because section, this tag right here, is not a valid HTML, it's taking, it's not understanding it. It's not recognizing it. So what we get to do is we're going to go ahead and change these just into normal H2 tags, which is going to be something that HTML understands and something that we can edit when we enter that editable region. So I'm just going to simply go ahead and grab all of this and make a bunch of H2s. So I'll grab this, delete the end tag, and I'll come in a second and add all of the ending tags for the H2s as well. Just wanted to kind of get this done first here. Alright, so we got this, and now we're going to end that H2, and we'll just hop in and keep doing that. Sweet. So now at this point, I now have headings instead of that, that XML node of section, which HTML doesn't understand, and therefore the WYSIWYG wouldn't be able to interpret. Let's go ahead and save one more time. Now we can see that our sections are showing up. And if I go into the edit view, now I can see that everything looks the same, but now I have this green editable region up top that says edit main content. That was what we defined in the button text attribute. And as soon as I click it, I'm now able to enter my editable region. So look at that. I can go ahead and edit this if I wanted to. My styles.txt was added, which is why I can see options here in the styles drop-down menu. If I hadn't done that CSS menu attribute inside the OUC editor tag, then this would be completely blank. I wouldn't see anything inside of this drop-down menu. So now let's just go ahead and save out of that. Now we can see, the changes are populating. Everything's wonderful. That's great. So if I wanted to, just for the sake of practice, making additional editable regions is a really simple process. In order to do it, I pretty much just simply need to declare another OUC div node in a different place. So what I'm going to do first of all is let's just take this other section right here, and I'm going to take my OUC div node right here, paste it into here. I need to give it another label, because once again, you can only have this, you can't have duplicate labels on the same page, so I can just call this one main content 2, for example. Make sure that we have another ending tag for the first OUC div. So now this is one editable region, and I've got another one in process here. And I will just copy and paste my same OUC editor tag. Nothing has to be unique about this one. Obviously, we still want to point to that same styles.txt, so I can have my custom styles in this region as well. We got this. I'll hit save. And if we go back to the editable, or the edit view, now I have 2 buttons instead of just simply 1. So that's pretty great. We have now built out a couple editable regions. Fairly simple process. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to add some page properties to this. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, go into the right button here. I'm going to go into the source, and in here, I'm going to go ahead and right below the opening document node, right at the beginning of my file essentially, I'm going to create another element, and this one's called OUC properties. And OUC properties, I'm actually going to make 2 of them, and you'll see why in here in just a second. So now we have 2 properties elements. What I'm actually going to do for both of these properties elements, I'm going to go ahead and give them different labels. So my first label inside this first OUC property is going to be called config. And the reason why we're giving this a label is because anything that's underneath the label equals config part of an OUC properties is going to be grouped all together in the page properties screen of OU Campus. And vice versa, we have another one. We're going to give this one a label of metadata. And that's going to group the rest of them in a specific way. And these specific labels, the ones that literally say config and metadata, are the ones that OU Campus recognizes. That's why we're using them here. And it'll make XPath easier later on down the road when we start using XSL to target these properties. So now we have our 2 properties labels, or two properties elements. And just as a reminder, once we make a property, we're going to have to create each individual page parameter that we're actually going to be editing. And those parameters are going to be defined through a parameter node right there. And these parameter elements are going to need quite a few attributes that are either mandatory or highly recommended. And these attributes are going to go a whole long way in terms of organizing and figuring out how users are actually going to interact with these different parameters. So the first mandatory attribute we need inside of a parameter element is called name, and this functions really similarly to the label that we have done for OUC divs and even for the OUC properties. It's just a unique identifier that's going to be used in the XSL when it targets this parameter with XPath. So what I'm going to do is inside of this config one, I'm going to make two parameters. The first one is going to be kind of a page heading or like a main content heading. And the second parameter will be an image that will be available inside of our banner. So the first one here I'm going to do for the page heading. So I'm just going to give this the name of heading. Something nice, easy to remember, something that's going to be descriptive. The next mandatory attribute we have is called type. And type, there's quite a few different types that determine how the parameter looks and how the parameter functions. Just as a sampler, so there's one that's type equals text. That's going to create a text field. Type equals asset will make that parameter an asset chooser that you can use. Type equals select will give you a drop-down menu. Type equals file chooser will give you a standard kind of OU Campus file chooser that you're used to seeing. Type equals checkbox will give you checkboxes. Type equals radio will give you radio buttons. And then finally, type equals date time gives you a date and time picker. For this one, we're just asking for a page heading, so I don't need anything else aside from type equals text. Next, we also have the, those are actually the two main page parameters that are the attributes for page parameters that are required, but there's a couple others that are pretty highly recommended. The first one of those is group, and this functions the same as it did in the OUC div. It just controls what group of users can edit this parameter. So I'll make this one everyone again. And then next we have one called prompt. And this is essentially what the label that's going to show up next to the parameter when you're actually editing it in the page properties screen. So this is just some helpful text that you can give to your users to make sure they understand what is expected of them when they fill out that field. So if you don't have the prompt attribute, it will still show up. The parameter will still show up, but it just won't have any title next to it. So people are going to probably be pretty confused as to what they're supposed to do. So for this one, I'm going to say prompt equals page heading. And then the final optional attribute is called alt. And this is just going to give helper text underneath the element, so you can also kind of, give your users a little bit more information. So we'll call this one alt, and I'll just say add a heading that will go above main body content. Sweet. So now if I wanted to give a default value for what this page heading is going to be, I could just put that in between the beginning tag and the ending tag right here. And I could add some default text if I wanted to. And this heading can be obviously, of course, changed as soon as you go into page properties. This just means, if you leave it blank, it just means that the user will be presented with a blank field at the beginning. But if you put something in here, it'll just have some default text pre-added. So that's our first parameter. Let's go on and move on to our second one. In this one, we're going to also give it a name. And since this one's going to be a banner image, I'll just call this image. For this one, we're going to do type, and this one's not going to be a text field. We're going to make this one a file chooser, so we can actually choose the image itself instead of having to type in a URL for it or something. I'll have my group be everyone again. Gonna add a prompt. That's gonna say banner image, and then for the alt, it's gonna say there we go. Now, because we've changed our type from text to file chooser for this specific parameter, it actually unlocks our ability to use a couple more optional attributes that wouldn't come into play if we were in a different type. So what's kind of cool is that some of the attributes for parameter elements are going to be type dependent. So in this case, there's 3 more that are going to come into play. The first one's called dependency. And what essentially this does is it just chooses whether the image that you're adding inside this parameter, whether it will use its dependency tag or whether it'll use a root relative URL when it actually gets inserted to the appropriate place on the page. And in order to have it use the dependency tag, I'm going to say dependency equals yes, just to confirm that it will use the dependency tag. There are two other attributes. I'm not going to add them into our example here because they're not necessary, but just so you know, they're called filter, which is going to filter the file extensions that will be visible inside of the file chooser when you open it. So you would put the filter attribute, and then the value of that attribute would be a file extension, and then the file chooser would only show that specific extension. And then there's also another one that's called source, which will determine whether the file chooser, when you open it up, whether it will show the production server or if it will show the staging server. So if you have a specific file that's only on one of those two servers, like only on the production server, for example, you could then just make sure that it's clear that when the file chooser opens, it'll send users to there. But the default values, if those attributes are omitted, there's default values that are just assigned to this parameter and to this file chooser. For example, the source will take me to the production server if I omit that attribute, and there won't be any filtering if I omit the filter attribute, and that's fine for what we need right now. All we want to do is just add this extra attribute of dependency here. So what I'm going to do is just close that out, and this one, since I don't actually have a dependency tag on hand with me right now, it would be kind of silly and foolish if I tried to add one in between the opening and closing tags of this particular parameter. So I'm going to leave this one blank, and that just means that there will be no image pre-selected until I go into the page properties and define one by myself. So now we've added our two parameters that are inside kind of the custom config section of OUC properties. So now let's move on to our second properties element, which is the label of metadata. And as you can probably guess, that this is going to be where we're controlling our metadata. So our page title, our description, our keywords if we use them, things along those lines. So the first one is the title of the page, and normally that's controlled with the simple title node, and you'll notice that right underneath here I still actually have a title node. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply cut it out from right there, and I'm just going to place it inside of my OUC properties, and now that's going to be editable from within page properties. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a description for my page, and descriptions are going to look a little bit differently from these parameter elements that we had up top. To get a description, we're going to actually have a meta tag, and then we're going to give it a name of description, and then the description itself is actually going to be controlled through the value of an attribute of this tag, because the meta tag is self-closing. So we're just going to have the content attribute, and everything that becomes our description is just going to be the value of our content attribute. And then we'll self-close this element, and there we go. So now we have some basic metadata, and we have some cool page parameters that we can start playing around with. So let's save, and just really quickly let's hop into the page properties and see what that looks like. So now we can see that we have two groups. We have title and metadata right here, and then we have custom settings. The reason why those two show up is because we gave those two properties elements the labels of metadata and config. Metadata will always show up at top, config will show up below, and then we have our individual parameters, which are showing up as actual things that we can edit here. So moving on to title and description, we can see that these are displaying appropriately. We had some default text for both of them, so if I wanted to, I could change this to something like sample page and sample description. Don't worry too much about tags. Tags are actually controlled separately from the source of a PCF file. It's something that OU Campus is applying other places. So, in case you're wondering why we hadn't added those inside our source, but they're still showing up, don't worry about it. That's something that's controlled elsewhere inside of OU Campus. Then when we move into custom settings, we already had our page heading pre-added in here. I'm actually going to leave that be for right now. Just as a quick reminder, we have page heading right here. This is what's being defined by our prompt attribute for that parameter element. And underneath it, we have this helper text, and that's what's being added through the alt attribute in that same parameter element. So let's go into the banner image, and you'll notice that this isn't a text field, it's a file chooser. So if I click on the file chooser, I'm just going to go ahead and choose an image that I want to display as my banner image. I'll just use this OmniUpdate logo. So as we can see, it adds my dependency tag, and that's because I used the dependency attribute and had it equal yes. So now let's go ahead and save, see what happens. When I save, though, you'll notice that nothing actually has changed in the preview of my page. The reason for that is because even though we've defined all of this inside the PCF, we haven't actually created some XSL that's going to recognize all of those properties and put them in the appropriate places on our page. So that's our next step. We're going to go ahead and work in the XSL again to get those things defined. So if I go back to my XSL, the first thing that I want to do is let's go ahead and get our metadata added to the correct area of our page. So what we're first going to do is up inside the head code, as you can see, what we have is we have a title element, and it's trying to take the value of the title node and put that in here into our XSL. The only downside is that no longer is title a specific node that is right off of the root of the entire page. Now it's hidden within, or not hidden, but it's placed within an OUC properties element. So we just have to change our XPath to make sure that it's pointing to the correct location. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to simply do OUC properties, because we want it to, look inside of that first. And we have two OUC property elements, so we're just going to delineate down by the label attribute. So I'm going to do, at label. So we're looking for the one that has an appropriate label, and the label here is going to be metadata. And you'll notice that I'm using single apostrophes here as opposed to a double quotes, and the reason for that is because we already have that statement encapsulated within a double quote expression, and essentially you can't have two double quotes nested inside one another. So if you have double quotes out at the top, then you have to do single quotes inside that expression. So that's why I'm doing that there. We'll end the bracket and do a slash. So now we're looking inside the OUC properties that element that has a label of metadata, and then we're looking for a title element that's inside that, and that's what the structure looks like in our PCF. So that's good to go. And this is self-closing, nothing else changes there. So now we're going to add our description as well. So the way to do that is we're going to add a meta tag, and it's called meta description, just like this. And so we're going to take that description. That description is normally, in HTML, it's going to be defined by the value of whatever this description attribute is. So we're going to do equals in quotes, just like we would with any normal attribute. But now we're going to have to grab the value that's inside our PCF and put it in here. So instead of being able to use our, bracket XSL value of select, we have to do the other format, which Yves showed you in the last video, and that's just using curly brackets, which is just kind of, there's already the understanding that means, hey, grab the value of this, and then we just fill it with XPath. So we're going to once again look for the OUC properties node, and we're going to make sure that we're looking at the right node, so we're going to have it be the label of metadata. And then inside that, we're going to look for the meta tag, and we want to make sure that it's the right meta tag. So we're going to look for the meta tag that has the attribute of name, and the value of that to be description. And then now that we're inside that meta tag, what we're going to do is we need to take the value of the content attribute. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to do @ content. So it's going to take whatever we have as the value of this attribute and plug that in as our meta description. So this once again is self-closing, so we've got that there. Let's go ahead and save the XSL and go back into our PCF and just make sure that worked. So we go to simple PCF. Obviously this is just metadata, so we're not seeing any functional change here. If we view the source, we can see up here, might be a little hard to see, let's zoom in. We've got our title, sample page, and then there's our meta description, our sample description. And if I wanted to, I could go throughout this and change that up to make it different through my page properties if I needed to. So now let's go back into the XSL and let's get our two custom page parameters to be displayed on our page as well. So what we're going to do with this is I'm going to go ahead and first add that page heading, that main content heading that I had talked about. So what I'm going to do is scrolling down into the template match for content, which is where we're applying all of our information for that main content region with our WYSIWYG editor. Right above this copy of command, which is going to take everything from the PCF and just put it in this div with the idea of content. Right above that, but still within the div, I'm going to take do a couple things here. So first of all, I know that page heading I want to be an H1. So I'm going to put that in the XSL, so whatever content, whatever text I have in there, it's always going to be wrapped within that H1 because I'm not controlling that within the PCF. And then inside there, I'm just going to grab the value of whatever I put for the page heading property or page heading parameter. So it's going to be another XSL value of, and then our good old buddy XPath, we're just going to be looking for the correct place. So I'm going to do something that's a little bit different here. So normally, since I'm already doing a template match for content, that means that I don't need to necessarily write anything. It already assumes that I'm inside the document node, and then it already assumes that I'm looking inside the content node. So I would only need to kind of go from that point onwards and have that be the root of my XPath inside this template match. However, our page property that determines the title of the heading is not actually within the content node. So it's in some other place that's at the same level of hierarchy as the content node in terms of, how many levels deep it is from the root node itself. But in order to kind of make that work, essentially I just need to rewrite the XPath from the root node all the way down. So I'm actually going to start with document. And then instead of going to content, I'm going to go to OUC properties. And this time, I'm going to be looking for the OUC properties that has the label of config instead of metadata. And then I'm going to look for the parameter that's inside that. And I want to make sure that I have the right parameter, so I'm going to target the parameter with the name of banner, or of heading, sorry. Got right there. And that's all I need to do. So that has essentially said, hey, take whatever text I have inside the parameter of the name of heading that resides within the OUC properties that has the label of config that exists in the document. Last but not least, just make sure that self closes. So now I'm going to have my banner to show up right here. Let's test that out. I'll hop back to the PCF, and we should see in the preview, there's our sample heading. It's not controlled within an editable region, but it's being displayed right above our main section, still in the general body content area. So that worked. Awesome. Our final step is we're going to go ahead and add that banner image. So just as you'd probably expect, our banner image is going to go in the little banner section that I've created. So we're going to first look in this template match for the banner node. And then inside the div, I want to make sure that I'm placing my image inside of that div. Otherwise it'll, be pushed off to the left or something else that we don't want. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add an image tag, because we're obviously getting a banner image, so we need to have an image tag. So let's go ahead and define the source of this. And the source of our banner image, it's that dependency tag that we chose inside of page properties. So once again, I'm going to have to grab another value of command, but since I'm doing that within an attribute of a tag already, I've got to use my curly brackets as opposed to the big XSL value of statement. So now once again, because we're inside the template match of banner, there's the assumption that we're already looking for additional nodes that just reside within that same banner node. But since we're doing this, we're pulling it from a page property instead of something that resides within banner, we have to do what we did down here and actually start from the root node and work our way down once again. So I'm just going to start with /document /OUC properties with the label of config, and we're going to look for the parameter inside that with the label of, or sorry, not the label, the name of image, and there we go. I'm just going to make sure that I'm self-closing that again, because the image tag is a self-closing one as well. So now we're going to take whatever the value is of this parameter that has the name of image, which is going to be a dependency tag. And that's exactly what we want, because we're essentially just saying, you know, replacing all of this with the dependency tag. So now let's go ahead and save one more time. And we'll hop out, go into the PCF. And now we can see that there's our banner showing up in the same region, but right before the banner right here, and that's exactly what we want. So there we have it. Now that we have the XSL set up, we can go into the page properties if I wanted to and change the values of those two parameters. So I could say, you know what, I'll own it. Brandon's page, yeah. And I could even go ahead and change up the banner image if I wanted to here, although I think that most of these images are huge, so that would cause some issues. Yeah, you know what, I'm just going to stick with this one. But if I save here and I go back to the preview, now you can see Brandon's page has changed just like there. So what we've done in this video is we've gone from a simple PCF file with no page properties and no editable regions to a page that we can now granularly update with page properties and using a WYSIWYG editor in OU Campus. Go ahead and take some time to practice this a bit on your own. Our next step is to use this exact page as the foundation for a template in OU Campus so we can start making more pages that actually look like it. Hope you enjoyed. Best of luck. Go ahead and practice, and we'll see you next time.